Hi, and welcome to Morning Afterglow. Today we're reflecting on Revelation chapter 6, from which I tried to preach this past Sunday morning. And this is a chapter, it's really about suffering. In verses 1 through 8, it talks about concerning the four apocalyptic horsemen, the general suffering of the entire world relative to war and famine and pestilence and all sorts of things. In verses 9 through 11, it talks about the suffering of God's people who are persecuted because of their testimony for the word of truth. In verses 12 through 17, it talks about the suffering of the unsaved under the judgment of God and the fear they feel as they face God in judgment, calling on the rocks and the mountains to fall on them and hide them from God. So it's just a chapter filled with suffering and colored with dark hues and shades. As God's people, God is with us in all of these things that we go through, whether it's the suffering found in the verses 1 through 8 and all of these terrible things that happen in war and hunger and sickness and death, and yet God is with us. Christ is breaking these seals, and He's giving us the sense that even though these things are very, very difficult, He is with us, and He is watching over us and protecting us as we endure and face these variety of things that happen throughout human history. And then as we're persecuted for our faith in verses 9 through 11, we sometimes wonder, as indeed those saints who talk to the Lord there, how long, Lord, are we going to have to wait for justice? Why are you allowing the wicked world to punish your people? And that question is asked by many persecuted believers all over the world today. And yet as we are facing these things as God's people, we can be assured, as God tells them in the passage, that there's a time, there's a plan, and there's a way that God is preparing to compensate us for all the pain that we have as God's people suffering for righteousness. And then as we think about the suffering of the unsaved, as God's people, I think we should thank God that we are saved. And I think every day of our lives we should, in addition to praying for the lost, give thanks to God that God reached down in His mercy and pulled us out of lostness and saved us from eternal condemnation. There is no way we can approximate or quantify how much pain is involved in being lost and suffering eternal condemnation under God's judgment. And so as God's people, no matter how dark the day may be, no matter how difficult our path may be at times, let's rejoice that God has saved us from our lost condition and from His judgment and from His wrath. As God's people, we realize that life can be difficult. And even as God's folks, we suffer at times as well. But there is ample reason to rejoice and to give thanks to God for His goodness to us, whether we're going through the general sufferings of this world, whether we're suffering persecution. Let's rejoice that we are not under the wrath of God, and God will provide for us as we walk the journey together. Thank you for joining us today. We will pick this up next time, and picking it up in chapter 7, we'll see that God is saving in the midst of suffering. I'll look forward to talking to you about that next time on Morning Afterglow.